All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to an energizing post-lunch session about leveraging CDP across the enterprise and data readiness. My name is Brian Chaffee. I'm on the partner team with Acxiom, so work very closely with Treasure Data and a number of our clients to help accelerate their time to value with the software. And co-presenting with me today is Victor Solanoy. So Victor, if you want to do a quick intro.
Hey everyone, I'm Victor Solanoy. I'm the solution architect, or one of many solution architects at Acxiom, and I'm responsible for CDP implementations as well as data and service integrations into the platform.
Perfect. Thank you, Victor. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a little bit of a hybrid approach. We've only got 25 minutes together. So what I thought we could do is basically have about 10 minutes of content that shares a little bit of detail about Acxiom's point of view on the space and how we help clients get ready for CDP implementation or optimization, depending on where they are in the journey. Then I want to kind of pivot it to being more of a panel type discussion. So Victor is here because he is very, very experienced across a number of CDP technologies, including Treasure Data. And I thought it'd be really interesting to kind of kick off a Q&A type session by asking Victor a couple of questions about things that he's seen from the trenches. When we get to that point, feel free to jump in with questions. Obviously, 25 minutes is not a ton of time, so we're happy to meet and just kind of sync up afterwards if there are further questions. But really, our main goal for today is to give everybody in the room an opportunity to just kind of think a little bit differently, potentially, about ways to implement and get value from CDPs. Before I jump in, just by a quick show of hands, we've actually heard a lot during this conference about CDP expanding beyond the traditional MarTech and AdTech use cases. How many folks in the room are already thinking about that as part of your business transformation? Cool. So quite a few. And then how many are actually like down the path as far as implementing those use cases? Yeah. Cool. So a fair number of you. All right, perfect. Well, let's go ahead and dig in. So this conversation really comes at a very interesting time for the CDP space, and I won't spend a lot of time rehashing everything that we've heard over the last couple of days, but as we've been listening to the presentations, it's really struck us that 2024 really has been a landmark year for the space. As you heard from Kaz's keynote yesterday, there is a lot of work that's being done in the analyst community around recognizing the capabilities of CDPs and helping customers make better decisions about the right CDP for their business. A lot of that analytic work has actually yielded Treasure Data a leadership spot in a couple of major quadrants. So just officially, kudos and congratulations to Treasure Data on that. So that's a huge achievement. We're also seeing a lot of consolidation and disruption in the space, right? So as we move into 2025, things like some of the innovations that Treasure Data has announced around AI frameworks, marketing co-pilots, we really expect to see more of that emerging. And when you think about the kind of historical context for CDP use, that just makes, it makes the game a lot more interesting and makes it a lot more challenging too, potentially. But just in case that wasn't enough, we are in fact starting to see a lot of proliferation of the CDP beyond the traditional marketing use cases. And we heard instances, Take-Two I think was the first one in yesterday's session, where Stuart's up talking about how they are actually ingesting telemetry, product usage information, not just to inform the drip journeys and the engagement with these big AAA titles, but also as a way to potentially inform their product development and the ways that they think about building new relationships with their customers. More and more, we are seeing that the conversation around, hey, it would be really good if we could get CDP connected to our call center, is becoming an additive conversation, an conversation. So it's call center and service center and potentially that product information so that customers can really leverage that data to be able to basically create a better brand experience for customers. That creates, as you would imagine, and as some of you by the show of hands are already experiencing, just an enormous number of considerations. It's almost overwhelming to think about. But at the risk of being overwhelming, we thought it'd be useful to throw it up on the slide for a second. So you've got a lot of the traditional considerations around data quality, data availability, data latency. Kind of that classic decision about, is batch good enough or do I really need real time? And what are the impacts from that from a cost trade-off perspective? There's also an increasing focus on things like identity resolution and how, as data moves through the broader enterprise, it becomes very important to have a strong practice around consent management and permissioning that basically gives you traceability to prove that your business is being the good steward that you know that you already are, right? But you have to have that traceability. So as far as something that we're hoping that you can kind of take away from today's session, what we thought we would do for a couple of minutes is just share Acxiom's perspective and our approach to thinking through that myriad of concerns and considerations that are out there. For us, we see a lot of success with the idea of using a customer journey to organize all of those considerations and to start to build out a roadmap. And we do that for a couple of reasons. It's worked for us well in the past, and so we want to keep doing what works, right? But also, we have found in talking with our customers that some of the best excitement and alignment conversations actually happen when you focus the entire team around something, a body of work that is going to improve the customer's experience with the brand. Typically that is something everybody is very, very interested in. And when you do that, you also get kind of the hidden benefit of starting to be able to put an organizing framework around use cases and considerations like the ones that we saw on the last slide. So a lot of folks, like when they're considering adopting a CDP, are thinking about use cases, right? Personalization, measurement, cross-sell, upsell, analytics. When you think about something in terms of a journey, it becomes interesting to start to organize those things. So an example that I use pretty frequently is within the financial services space, there's this concept of an early month on book customer, right? Somebody who's just opened up a checking account. If we're working with a bank and they're talking with us about, I'd really love to have a better early month on book program, suddenly you're talking about a couple of journeys that let the bank realize value pretty quickly, right? You're talking about maybe a drip campaign. Somebody just opens a checking account. How are they going to experience your brand through that? You're thinking about maybe a campaign to offer them that next best potential banking product, so going from a checking to a savings, going from a savings maybe to a money market. What happens when we put all of that on a piece of paper with the client is that then it becomes possible to say, when we execute on this journey, we actually have foundational capabilities now around personalization, cross-sell, upsell, measurement, and so forth, right? So what seems daunting at first becomes something that can actually be achieved in kind of a meaningful and addressable way. Once we've thought through the journey, we're obviously going to take time to think through the data aspects, right? Data's been the most massive theme of this conference in total. But we also think about data in terms of data about the things that the customer needs to interact with, right? So a lot of times when people think data, they think customer data. What do we know about the people? We know that the attributes that we have about somebody eventually need to be able to map to things that we know about content on a website or things that we know about call center scripts to make that journey come together and actually work in real life. And then finally, the last piece of it is then thinking about, again, within the context of the journey, within the context of all this data that we're thinking about, what is the most effective path for that data to travel through your existing investments to be able then to realize that journey for your customer and to enhance the brand promise that you have with them. All of that ends up creating a journey that is much more robust, much more effective, and much more able then to give you a foundation and a framework for you to go back to your stakeholders and say, hey, this stuff is really working. It's working today. And I have a plan for the next thing that we can do. So just to give you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain into Acxiom's process, we actually have a couple of different offerings that we term data readiness. But what we're really talking about here is a 6 to 8 week process where we start off with discovery conversations, which, to be to really let you behind the curtain, that's as much about getting internal alignment as it is documenting stuff, right? But taking the time to kick off the project, talk about the objectives, talk about what you know, put together a project plan, and then through the course of the activities that you see up here on the slide, actually taking an agile but systematic approach to defining the things that need to be in place in order for you to bring those couple of customer journeys and the use cases that support them to life. In terms of what we build along the way, the best way to think about this is really as a road almost, maybe even a yellow brick road, but at least a road. And probably the big takeaway from this slide, or two big takeaways, are that we think about these types of documents as things that we're going to build out, again, foundationally, so that as you layer additional journeys and use cases on, you have the ability to add on to these documents. The other thing that's really key in this is that we've found that it's very important to take just a quick pause at the end of that initial assessment and do a socialization deck. And what that does is it basically creates a closed loop with all of the stakeholders that you've brought into the conversation to begin with 7 or 8 weeks ago. This entire thing is, it does take a little bit of time, but it's something that we have found most effective prior to the implementation of a CDP. It also has great value when you're trying to think about how to optimize and get more value from your CDP investments. So with all of that said, that's kind of the background. I'd like to invite Victor up. I have a couple of questions for Victor, and I think just to start out, we'll start with the question about where you have seen some of the most interesting non-traditional CDP use cases.
So I had to write a list down because there's just a lot of different things you could do that are not marketing related. So we talked about, on the stage yesterday, there was a little bit of discussion around the use of customer support data, call center data, into the CDP. That is one non-traditional use case of the CDP, and for obvious reasons, being able to connect that data, that call center data, to a person and connect that person to a series of behaviors is incredibly useful for the lifetime of that customer to your brand. Another one is less customer-centric and more product-centric, using the CDP, the data that's collected, the segmentation, the various rules that you're putting in place to help product identify possibly gaps within your flows, whether that's data or customer experience. So it's just another one of those tools that can be used for that purpose. Goes without saying, customer retention is also an important piece. I think most of you are probably in that position where you're looking for, how do I keep my customers from leaving? How do I get them to buy more? How do I keep them, and have them execute certain calls to action? CDP, your segmentation, your activations into different channels, is all fair game for that particular use case. Operational efficiency. It goes without saying, some of the conversations yesterday and today in the ballroom, covered the democratization of data. Having that data centralized into a single store that can be used for a wide variety of purposes, whether it's internal, things that you want to know about, your user experiences, or what we were talking about with retention and all those different things. The data you're landing into the CDP could be used for a very wide variety of purposes. And the last one Brian talked about a little bit, and that's compliance and privacy management. So that is something that some CDPs are excellent at, and definitely take that into consideration in terms of what data that you collect, what you're allowed to collect, and how you can use those. That's my list.
Thank you. That's a good list. And then I guess the other main question, and then I'd definitely like to elicit some questions from the audience as well. But as we've worked through various data readiness assessments, Are there any trends or themes that you've seen that have been particularly interesting as far as what we uncovered during that process?
Sorry, wasn't paying attention.
It's all right.
So, I think the big piece is, for me, for the CDPs that I've been involved with in terms of implementation and the architecture, the biggest item really is around, understanding your data. So this process that you were talking about with data readiness helps identify things that shouldn't be surprises later on. Those surprises can be huge gotchas. They could be things like, you thought you had relatively decent data, but it turns out you have a lot of duplication because of maybe the nature of your business. That, a person may have 20 different addresses because they worked at 20 different places over the course of 5 years, or lived in, a number of places in a very short period of time, which causes issues around identity, and deduplication. I think one of the things that I've run into quite a bit is schema documentation. Your databases, your data sources, where it's coming from, who controls what. That documentation is incredibly useful in the process of building, an understanding of the data sets that you're going to want. Tie that to the use cases that you want to empower. That helps, a team like mine understand what needs to be done, what needs to be connected, and ultimately what data is necessary and what resolution of data is necessary to power the use cases that you have in mind. So the other item is understand the data, data flows, the data, how you're collecting data, who's collecting data for you. All of those things do have an impact to the reality of you have a schema, but what's your data like? That could fall into the category of any number of things. That's generically data quality, but there could be hygiene issues. There might be recency issues. Is the data up to date? Is the data standardized? All of those fun things. So all that PII that you would want to pull everything together for identification are items that could cause problems down the line. So it's really important to nail that down.
And just to maybe jump in with a curveball question, would you say that is the kind of point at which you can make a determination about what really is the minimum viable quantity of data that really needs to be ingested or output, and to do that in kind of a foundational way, right? Because you're not going to just go with these two use cases or these two journeys ultimately. It's ultimately going to be a much bigger thing that you're foundationally planning for.
So I think the way to think of it is CDPs are about people. They're not about IDs. They're not about phone numbers or email addresses or anything like that. You want to target a person, whether that person lives at 123 Main Street or has, maybe, one of 2 phone numbers and maybe 5 email addresses. You want to be able to target that person. And so from a data perspective, obviously PII is very, very important, but it's really important, like, Brian was kind of alluding to have that foundational knowledge of what you need to power your use cases. So you might have, thousands of columns of data, but the reality is for your CDP, you only need maybe 15 or 20 of those things. Start with that and then grow. You don't want to bring everything in because that becomes an issue in terms of performance. It's also kind of a bit of a mess when it comes to what do you want to use, what do you not need to use, and have to identify, those things that, in one case that I ran into, the issue that I found was because data was coming in from a wide variety of sources, certain things like social security numbers were being brought in. No, that's a no-no. So hence the data readiness, Understanding your data sources and then identifying the data that you need to bring in as foundational, then you can always add it. And that's the beauty of treasure data, right? Is that you can pick what you need and grow as necessary. You don't have to bring everything in.
Thanks. So I know this was like a really quick 25 minutes. I think we probably have time for one question, if anybody wants to throw one out there. Yeah.
You mentioned call centers. They're interesting because they often advertise competency with various CRM tools as a competitive differentiator. The opportunities are huge with CDP, not just in terms of like next generation, but also opening the doors for AI automation.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So a call center can suddenly do 10 times the volume of business without having to increase headcount necessarily. In terms of a target market segment, has Acxiom done anything specifically focused on call centers, taking on use cases or strategies in play that really block that opportunity with competitors?
Yeah, I think at this point, a majority is the data is available. Treasure data allows you to bring in a wide variety of data. As it was an ask to bring that data in. Now, ultimately, the question is, what is the use case on how that data is going to be used? That's a little bit more difficult because that data is behavioral data that can be associated with the profile itself. Now, the question is, how do you use that data to power certain use cases? If you're looking at, if one of your use cases is, let's say, customer loyalty, then it depends on what data and what types of scoring mechanisms are available from the call centers. Is it a positive sentiment? Is it a negative sentiment? Is it neutral? Those things tied to other things that you're collecting ends up being an important piece to understanding, is there a possibility of churn because of negative sentiment in the call center? But balance that out with the other things. That might be an element in loyalty and a customer returning. But if they have a history of long purchases, again, the rules, right? How much do you weigh the call center against an encyclopedia of purchases, whether it's online or brick and mortar, if there's a loyalty program in place. So there's other pieces of data that come into play, but the loyalty data is not loyalty. The customer call center data is one element that could be used, but it really depends on your use case.
Right. So like churn risk tied to like RFM analytics to score.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Value, is this a low value customer or potentially a high-end VIP customer that you really, really want your best call center people to try and avoid the churn,
Mm-hmm.
lower the risk?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good question. Thank you. Well, we are at time, unfortunately, but again, very happy to continue the conversation throughout the rest of today, or potentially not during the film because nobody likes to talk during a film, but maybe before or after the film tonight, if y'all are heading out to the Sphere. So thank you, everybody, for your attention, and hope you have a good afternoon.